criminals perform a function in society. Yes, I'm not saying that it's a positive function, but nonetheless, they are a product of their time, they are a product of their system. The corrupt party bosses needed to have people who would basically could turn the access to resources that they had into goods and services, turn it into a Western record player or whatever else that they wanted. The black marketeers needed protection, and organised crime basically acted as the connective tissue between these two worlds. But as I said, it was very much the weakest and most dependent. And then along came Gorbachev and his quixotic attempt to reform the unreformable, it seems. What did Gorbachev do? Well, he launched a massive anti-alcohol campaign that had exactly the same productive effect as prohibition in the United States. Basically took this massive market and said, here you go, gangsters, enjoy. Suddenly they had vast amounts of money now because they had a huge and enthusiastic clientele. Gorbachev created low-level private enterprises, the cooperative movement, which was perfect then for the gangsters with their new money to launder that, to basically take it over, or just to exploit and extort from. And Gorbachev, through his various programs of democratization, essentially shattered the unity of the Communist Party, shattered the power of the state. And suddenly we found ourselves in a position in which those corrupt bureaucrats, who once had been the undisputed powers in the land, suddenly now needed allies, particularly because they were going to face elections. They needed allies who could get the vote out. They needed allies who could, basically kick the hell out of any opposition candidates and so forth. And because they could no longer protect them, the black marketeers now actually were vulnerable. So suddenly the gangsters, from having been the weakest element of this trinity, were for a short while the strongest. Didn't last. But nonetheless, for that brief heady moment, the gangsters seemed to be in the ascendant. And this is what first got me thinking, hang on, we have never really thought about organised crime in a police state. I mean, some émigré writers had written about organised crime in the Soviet Union, and full kudos to them. And basically they had been ignored and patronised by the Western scholarly community. Well, we were wrong. Organised crime can operate within a police state, in the wainscoting, in the corners, stuck away in the shadows, but ready to emerge. And so here we are. So very briefly, let me conclude by saying, okay, so what do we have now? Is this a mafia state? No. Mafia state. Brilliant line, problematic. See, we even have sound effects. Because that implies somehow that the gangsters run the state, or the state runs the gangsters. It is, of course, much more complex than that. What we have seen is the old style tattooed thugs that we love and know from the movies and so forth have pretty much not disappeared, but they're no longer the dominant force. The dominant force in Russian organised crime is the authority, the authority. Essentially the gangster businessman who doesn't care about the old codes, who doesn't wear all these tattoos and things, because basically it's equivalent to having a sign saying, hey, I'm a gangster. The old Vory wanted to identify themselves as separate from society. The new authority, they want to drift within society. They want to be invited to the ambassador's reception and being offered Ferrero Rocher, and all the other things that legitimacy can offer. What we have got instead is an interpenetration of the worlds of business, crime, and politics. They are not exactly the same. But on the other hand, they are closer together than we and most Russians would like. This interaction between criminal and state, which is often actually difficult to work out quite who is in charge, because precisely that will actually change over time. Today, you are the pawn of the state apparatus. Tomorrow, maybe you are using the state apparatus. But, and this is the third point, when it comes down to it, ultimately the state will win. You can win some victories, you can win some battles, but the campaign is always the state's.